Steve Parr from American Ground Radio joins us. Speaking of deafening silence.
Wow.
We were talking a couple of seconds ago off the air that it had to do, I guess it started with me or Matt, and it was, I think your line was, none of us in this room right now look our age.
So good for our age was the actual term.
And I said, I think I look pretty good for my age. And Matt said, no, you really don't. And I said, Matt looks pretty good for a 55-year-old man.
And if he were 55, I'd agree with you.
Yeah.
If I shaved, I'd look 12. So there's that.
No.
And what I said still stands then.
What's that?
That none of us look good for our age, even if he looks 12.
Yeah, you got a point. I haven't shaved in about 4 or 5 days.
All right.
And I told Steve, I'm at the point now when I walk by a mirror or a reflection, I do a double take because at some point my beard is so gray that I look at the mirror and go, who's that old guy?
And you tell him to get off your lawn.
I start yelling at him. No, he yells at me. My reflection yells first. I was watching last evening, and California Governor Jerry Brown, in the midst of the horrific wildfires they're having, looks straight at the camera and he says, "This more than anything else is an example of the global warming catastrophe." And he looked directly in the camera and said to me, someone he would call a global warming denier, who he says make the problem worse.
Yeah, it's your fault, by the way.
Because I am self-immolating at some point.
Look, just having bad thoughts causes forest fires.
Why are they only having wildfires? And I pointed this out to somebody last week. I said, why do we only seem to have those in California? They have lots of timberland in other states. In fact, I think Georgia is the #2 forestry state in the United States. I don't see that Georgia's burning down. What's the deal?
Well, first of all, if it's global warming, why weren't these fires worse 2 years ago when temperatures were actually warmer than they are today? Let's just start with a really, really good question there. Temperatures have gone down over the last 2 years, global temperatures.
I want you to hit on that, but I'm going to read some headlines to you.
All right.
Because you know more about this, and you can run down your bona fides in just a couple of seconds.
Okay.
Radical environmentalists are to blame for California wildfires.
That's redundant.
Don't blame wildfires on climate change. It's environmentalists' fault.
Okay.
Environmentalist policies exacerbate wildfires. It's time to rethink forest management. California wildfires caused by radical environmentalists, not climate change.
So let me get to what that's all about. I was looking at this graph of data last night about forest fires, acres of forest burned in the United States by year. And over the last 10 years, or actually, I'm sorry, over the last 20 years or so, the number of acres burned in the United States is about twice what it was in the 1960s and the 1980s.
Wait. Okay, go ahead.
So the number of acres burned, forest fires in the United States is about twice right now for the past 20 years what it was from the 1960s to the 1980s. But it's about 1/5 of what was burned from the 1920s through the 1950s.
Yeah.
So the difference was, as we got into the 1960s, we changed the way we did forestry management. We got a little bit smarter. We got some more roads into places. We started thinning stuff out. We started taking more care of the forests that were out there, and we had a dramatic reduction in the number of acres that were burned.
We let the businesses run their business.
Then in 1994, there was a court case. A Clinton-appointed judge said, look, when you're trying to thin out this California forest, you didn't take into account endangered species. Therefore, you can't thin out this forest anymore for fire suppression management because it might affect wildlife.
So basically,
we started to double the number of acres burned after that court ruling.
Pardon me. So basically, it's we got to protect the barn swallows on the bridge here.
Right. Well, or in this case, the spotted owl, because by not taking care of the spotted, by thinning out the forest, we might put the spotted owl in danger. Of course, when you have a forest fire that comes through and burns up the entire forest you didn't manage, that definitely will put the spotted owl in danger.
Yeah, no kidding. I use this as an example, as an analogy. I said to somebody talking about this last week, I said, imagine my lawn during the fall. I just don't bother ever to rake the leaves. I just leave them right there.
It's called au naturel.
Meanwhile, you just rake yours, you keep it neat and clean. Whose do you think is more likely to go up in flames if somebody drops a match or throws a cigarette on the lawn? Isn't that basically where we are in California forestry?
It is, and California really needs to pay attention to it because California is in what's called, speaking of climate change, California's in what's called a Mediterranean climate because you've got a cold current coming down the Pacific coast, and that tends to suppress the creation of rainstorms. That's why California is so dry. It's like the Mediterranean. It's like Italy in that regard. It's why you're able to grow grapes in both places, right? Because they have a similar climate. Well, that type of a climate tends to have periods of really wet. When the rains come, man, they really come. And then you have prolonged periods of no rain at all. So you get fast growth followed by no rainfall, so everything that grew dries out. This is a climate that's designed for fires. You've got to manage it. Again, with global warming, this whole climate change thing, the environmentalists are trying to stop nature from happening. They're trying to stop climate from ever changing, and that's ridiculous.
When we come back, I am going to say to you, stop nature from happening. I want you to expound on that, to tell us, to get a little bit. Let's go macro on that.
All right.